and patriotically later in that speech that he did not therefore engage in insurrection. That claim is wrong at every level. He used fight 20 times in that speech, peaceful only once. Professor Simi explains how leaders use language like that, like the peacefully comment, to create plausible deniability that is just filter. Trump well knew how his reporters would respond. He saw what happened when he told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by, and how they treated that as an endorsement. In fact, his use of peaceful in the rally, and again, use in this proceeding, highlights that he knew the power of his other words. If you don't think people are going to engage in violence after what you told them, or that your words will provoke violence, you don't need to say, be peaceful. They already will be. But that speech that we just saw got the crowd worked up and headed to the Capitol. I'll show you a video taken from the top of the Capitol at 2:23. You can see the timestamp in the upper left. So after the speech, the crowd followed Trump's orders and marched down to the Capitol. But as you can see from the video, much of the rally, they weren't doing much. They were just standing there. So what did Trump do right after, the minute after this video? He posted a tweet that incited the mob to violence. Again, channeling on the focus on Mike Pence he used earlier in the day. He described Mike Pence as weak and said he didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution. USA demands the truth. And look what happened. Instantaneously with this tweet, we see people read it in the crowd from bullhorns. They immediately started chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," and the violence began in earnest.
Our men didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. U.S. demands the truth. We need an area 40 house members. They're all walking over now. Who's calling? We're trying to hold the upper deck. We're trying to hold the upper deck down. We need to hold the doors in the Capitol. I need court support.
There was no possible innocent explanation for that tweet that set the crowd on fire. We'll hear later today from Officer Hodges. This is his body cam at the exact same time. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, it's 2:28. So within 5 minutes of Trump's issuing that tweet, this is what he faced. So within 30 minutes of the tweet, we see the picture from the same vantage point we saw before. The crowd had overrun the barriers, but this was the back of the crowd. This was a crowd that was not the front line of the attack, of the assault on our constitutional process. We have video where it shows Officer Hodges within 30 minutes of the tweet. He had retreated to the tunnel and was trying to defend the tunnel against this mob. That is Officer Hodges, who you'll hear from shortly. This was an insurrection that Trump led. As we've seen, he summoned and organized the mob. He gave the mob a common purpose: disrupt Mike Pence's certification of the election. He did that by inciting the mob at the ellipse. He knew that mob was armed and dangerous. He told the mob to go to the Capitol with him. Once they were there and not sufficiently violent, he incited the mob with that 2:24 p.m. tweet and others that followed. And importantly, he helped the mob by refusing to mobilize resources to stop the attack. He spent 3 hours watching it unfold on TV without doing a single thing, even though he was the most powerful person in the world. Now, what does Trump say in response to this overwhelming evidence? He says a few things. He says, hey, I said peacefully in the speech, so I didn't engage in the insurrection. And we already talked about that. That peacefully proves his intent. He then says, I wasn't there. I did not engage in insurrection. But he did. He kept quiet. He tweeted inflammatory statements that incited the mob and watched the mayhem unfold for 3 hours with doing nothing. He continued to try to pressure Congress to do the mob's bidding and overturn the election. And lastly, Trump says, others failed to protect the Capitol. So it's not my fault. There was an insurrection. He blames others. But it was Trump's dereliction of duty, in violation of his oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, that caused the constitutional process to stop. You'll hear from national security expert Bill Banks, who's dedicated his career to the safety of our nation, studying how it works. He wrote a book recently called Soldiers on the Home Front, The Domestic Role of the American Military. He explains that Trump did not use the available federal resources. In fact, Trump didn't use the resources he used in response to other threats, like the Black Lives Matter protest at Lafayette Square, where they used tear gas and federal agents to clear the square very violently. Now, Trump is going to call witnesses, we understand, to say that he tried to put people in place to defend the Capitol before January 6th. That is not true. No record exists of him doing that. No indication that he used his vast power as commander-in-chief to do that at all. That is just an invented excuse after the fact with no evidentiary support. But even that doesn't matter. Trump cannot avoid culpability for engaging in insurrection by blaming the victim. Whether or not an insurrection occurred does not turn on how well defended the Capitol was. He ignited the mob, told them to go to the Capitol, and inflamed them with his tweet. Now finally, Trump says the law, even if all that's true, the law doesn't apply to him. First, because he says he just was using speech. But again, Professor Magliocca explains the history of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and using robust historical sources shows that at the time of passage, 1868, engaging in insurrection included words of incitement or specific words of encouragement. That's what Trump did here. And in any event, it's not just Trump's speech that is at issue. His conduct contributed to the mob's violence. His failure to act when his oath required him to do so led to the insurrection. Now, Trump brings an expert, Professor De La Hunty, but he's no expert at all on the 14th Amendment. Never written a book or a peer-reviewed article on this issue, on the 14th Amendment, more generally, not performed any original history. There's no record of him studying this before he wrote a short opinion piece 2 months ago. Now, Trump next argues that the 14th Amendment doesn't cover the president, that there's an exception because it's a different kind of officer. Again, Professor Magliocca will explain why history contradicts this claim. It's nonsensical to create an exception for the most powerful person in government, and at the time in 1868, there's widespread understanding that officer included the president. Finally, Trump claims that state courts like this one can't hear these disputes. Now, as we've talked about, he's wrong under Colorado law. Hanlon v. Gessler makes clear that the election code requires issues regarding a candidate's eligibility to be determined by the courts, which is what we're doing here. In addition to this bedrock law, we'll also hear from Hillary Rudy, who's the deputy director in the Secretary of State's Elections Division, and she will explain the history of Secretary of State enforcement of qualifications and qualification challenges in court. And I think Your Honor will easily conclude that this action falls well within a long line of cases where courts decide ballot eligibility requirements. Now, our Constitution prevents people who betrayed their solemn oath, as Trump did here, from serving in office again. Colorado law gives these voters the right to make sure their votes will count by coming to this court and ensuring that only eligible candidates appear on our ballots. Trump engaged in insurrection and therefore cannot appear on the ballot. No person, not even the former president, is above the law. We ask after this hearing that this court find Trump is an ineligible candidate under Colorado law and order the Secretary of State not to place him on the ballot. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I don't have a highly produced video, but I do have a few words that I think this court should follow and think about in this case. The United States is the oldest modern democracy, well over 200 years, far different than any other country in many ways. And what makes us different is the experiment we launched, which is this thing called elections. We have elections. And that means when it comes to decide as to who should lead our nation, it's the people of the United States of America that get to make those decisions. Not 6 voters in Colorado who've picked and chosen who they want to file a lawsuit against. And this court should not interfere with that fundamental value, that rule of democracy. It's the people who get to decide. And this lawsuit seeks to cancel that principle. This lawsuit is anti-democratic. It looks to extinguish the opportunity for millions of Coloradans, Colorado Republicans and unaffiliated voters to be able to choose and vote for the presidential candidate they want. In fact, the leading Republican presidential candidate. And by many measures, the candidate, most likely to win the presidency. They want to extinguish that opportunity by preventing him from running for office. It is anti-democratic. This is a case of lawfare that seeks to interfere with the presidential election. We argue here that this, at its basest level, this is election interference. The petitioners here, the 6 voters, have appointed themselves private attorney generals. They can pick and choose and file lawsuits against whom they seek to disqualify. And they rely on exceptionally weak and frankly, in some cases, fringe legal and logical theories to try and tilt the playing field of this election by wiping out President Trump's ability to run for election well before anyone has an opportunity to vote. They're asking today for a number of historical firsts. First, they are asking this court to be the first ever in American history, to disqualify a presidential candidate under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. We've pointed the court, I believe, to, or we will, Horace Greeley, who ran in 1872 as a Democratic presidential candidate. He had paid for Jefferson Thomas's bail. He was loudly accused of giving aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States shortly after the Civil War when he ran. Lots of debate on that issue. No one ever once thought of trying to disqualify him from voting. They took their arguments to the people for them to make that decision. Eugene Debs, Socialist Party USA candidate in 4 elections, in 1920, ran from jail. He had been convicted of sedition for giving aid and comfort to enemies during the First World War by trying to stop military recruitment. He was convicted of that. He ran from jail. He was never disqualified. No attempt was made to disqualify him under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. The case of Eugene Debs is often regarded as a low point in American history, a low point when it comes to First Amendment protections. And for good reason. People should be able to run for office and shouldn't be punished for their speech. The petitioners asked this court to be the first state court in American history to disqualify a presidential candidate. They are asking for the first time in American history to disqualify any federal candidate, a state court to disqualify any federal candidate. This is the first time in Colorado history anyone's ever tried to disqualify a presidential candidate under the 14th Amendment. Asking the Secretary of State to go back and research a candidate's behavior, that's also a first. Never been asked or demanded before. Even right now, there are about 50 cases, either pending or have been nationwide, specifically attacking President Trump. This is not a new tactic. This is the first where a dismissal is not automatically, I shouldn't say automatically, but promptly been granted because of the weakness of so many of these arguments. They're asking for the first time that the January 6th report be treated as evidence in this court, in a court of law, that politicized hearing. That's what they're asking, is that this court rely upon that as evidence. And frankly, they're asking this court to be the first in the country ever to embrace a number of legal theories that have never been accepted by a court, state or federal. There's a lot of firsts they're trying in this case. their legal theories. I mean, we're arguing we shouldn't even be here. And we've argued that multiple times. This is a federal issue, perhaps the most important federal issue we can have. And it's for Congress to set these standards, for Congress to provide guidance, not for the petitioners to come up with theories and try and convince you that they may be right. We've argued the 14th Amendment is not self-executing and the preemption and political question, and we understand this court's ruled against us in every instance. But nearly every court that's ever looked at presidential qualifications, and I'm not just talking about issues involving President Trump. Could you hand that water?
You should just expect this to be a regular occurrence.
I live in Denver, Your Honor. I understand sirens, unfortunately.
I really like this courtroom because it's right next to the office.
So it's not just President Trump. You may recall that there was a little bit of controversy about President Obama's citizenship. And there was some controversy about Senator and presidential candidate McCain's citizenship. And there was controversy about Senator and presidential candidate Cruz's citizenship. And there's one or two instances where those went to trial. But the vast majority of them were properly dismissed. The overwhelming weight of evidence is that this case should not be here. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of these specific claims. The claim that there was an insurrection. What constitutes an insurrection really needs to be grounded in historical usage. Because if you don't ground it in historical usage, you're just making it up. Now, I'm not accusing the court of making it up. I'm accusing the petitioners of making it up. But look, you will hear from Professor Delahunty that there are lots of definitions of what an insurrection is. It's been going on, that word's been in English usage for a couple hundred years, probably more. I haven't quite looked at the etymology of it. And there are a lot of definitions. Your Honor, I submit I could construct a legal argument or a law review article defending pretty much any one of those definitions. And when there are numerous definitions, that means there's really none. You might as well pick a definition out of the hat. And the petitioners have picked a definition out of the hat that suits them. That's their job. I get it. But frankly, they're making up the standard so that it fits the facts of January 6th. And I'm sure they'll try and come up with an argument that it'll just fit the facts of January 6th and it'll never fit any other facts and there can never be any consequences. But the bottom line is they're making it up and they're picking a definition out of the hat. What constitutes an insurrection needs to be grounded in historical usage because that's what the law demands. That's what equality under the law demands. That's what fairness, so we understand what the standards are by which we comport our behavior, not post facto making it up to try and figure that out. The term engage. The term engage means to do something. Frankly, no one really knows what that means, but I think we can all agree it means to do something. That's what the word engage means, okay? There's substantial historical evidence that engage does not mean mere incitement through words. It doesn't mean that. And frankly, President Trump didn't engage. He didn't carry a pitchfork to the Capitol grounds. He didn't lead a charge. He didn't get in a fist fight with legislators. He didn't goad President Biden into going out back and having a fight. He gave a speech in which he asked people to peacefully and patriotically go to the Capitol to protest. Now, I understand that there are several experts that are going to testify, and one's going to testify that President Trump, he just didn't do enough. He should have done more. Now, that's a case of Monday morning quarterbacking, but he's saying, you should have done more. You didn't do enough. Should have done more, should have done more stuff earlier. I can come up with all kinds of theories, this professor will say, as to why you should have done enough stuff. And that professor is no doubt a learned man and very thoughtful on this. But his basic argument when it comes down to it is they're claiming President Trump was negligent. And we reject that factual claim, of course. And you'll hear the evidence that that characterization is completely wrong. But more fundamentally, the entire theory is wrong. The failure to do something is the opposite of the word engage. It's the opposite of the word engage. And we've argued engage requires specific intent. Someone doesn't just sort of stumble into starting an insurrection. They have to have the intent to do that. And you'll hear evidence that President Trump took very specific actions to try to prevent violence, to take precautions that he didn't want there to be violence on January 6th. And on January 6th, he called for peace. And he used the word peace at least 4 times in his speech at the Ellipse and 2 tweets and a video message. So he asked for peace. Now, the petitioners have played a couple videos.
Cards are stacked against you, I guess.
I've been here before, Your Honor.
I promise it's going to be an equal opportunity problem.
I'm assuming your clerks are not taking time against me when the sirens go by. Stop that timer, please. So my next point is, thank God we have a First Amendment. I'm very thankful for the First Amendment. Spent most of my career defending the First Amendment. Now, there's a reason it's the first, not the second, not the eighth, as I debate with my friends who like the Second Amendment. It's the First Amendment, and it's free speech. And I referred to Eugene Debs before. Eugene Debs was thrown in jail. He had to run for president from jail because of his speech. And it's properly condemned, that case today. And in fact, even then, his sentence was commuted very shortly after the election of 2020. None of President Trump's speech ever called for violence, just the opposite. None of it ever called for insurrection. Did it call for political pressure? Yeah. Did it use a metaphor to fight in the political context? Yes. And I don't think even the petitioners would allege that President Trump, when he says fight, he wants to get into a fist fight with people. Okay? None of his speech called for the overthrow of government. None of it. Any objective reading, the plain language of his speech, was clearly not directed towards violence. Now, the petitioners are going to have an expert on speech, an expert who says right-wing speech. He understands what right-wing speech, right-wing extremist speech really means. And he's basically going to argue, when you strip away all of the academic language and you look at what he's saying, he's going to say, look, President Trump used a bunch of dog whistles. And of course, a dog whistle is a whistle that has a very high pitch that humans can't hear, but dogs can hear. Okay? And he's going to say, President Trump had this sort of dog whistle. I don't know if he'll use the phrase dog whistle. But he used a speech that really these far right-wing extremists could understand and mobilize on. But us mere mortals, well, we missed it. We didn't understand it, but those folks understood it. He's going to say that normal, sort of commonly used English doesn't count because there's this subjective, special language out there that is sort of underneath it all that has been unearthed by the sociologist. And only right-wing extremists and people very learned in sociology and right-wing extremism can understand. And he's going to say that with his expertise, he's been able to decipher what we normal mortals cannot. And his decipherment is going to basically say that President Trump was really ordering people to be violent. Even when he said peaceful and patriotically, even when he sent out tweets that said be peaceful, that's not really what he meant. And those right-wingers knew it. He meant something else. This turns our American values on their head. It is fundamentally anti-First Amendment. He is saying that when we look at political speech, we don't look at it in an objective way. We don't look at the plain meaning of the words. We look at this secret, hidden interpretation that no one in this courtroom, maybe someone in this courtroom besides him can understand. Maybe he thinks I understand it and no one else can. I will submit I was in Georgia on January 6th helping with an election. But the right wing can understand it, but no one else. That is anti-First Amendment. In fact, that has been soundly rejected by our courts, and properly so. We look at what people say as we commonly understand them. And the common understanding of peacefully and patriotic means don't commit violence and support your country. That's what it means. Let's talk about the history and meaning of Section 3. You're going to hear from two professors. You've gotten about 40,000 words of briefing on sort of the meaning of Section 3. You've rendered an opinion against us. And I understand, that's a conditional opinion. You want more evidence, and you want to hear more argument, and that's what we're providing. And so I'm going to ask you three things, all right? First, I'm going to ask you to reconsider your footnote 5 in your order. I'm not, Your Honor, because I'm not going to take up the time. But I'm simply going to ask you to reconsider it, okay?
I'll write it down.
Thank you. And I think those cases deserve a much closer reading, and I respectfully say I believe that they were improperly mischaracterized. Okay? So that's my first request. My second request is, when you look at the experts, and our position, and I think the court ultimately agrees, is that they're testifying as to what the law is and what the history is. And Your Honor rightfully recognized that there's other folks out there. So I'm just going to give you a lineup of the other folks. On one side, the petitioners cite Ballot and Paulson and Graber, three professors. Ballot, Paulson, and Graber. And on our side, we cite Tillman and Blackman and Lash. And I'd like you to take particular care to look at Lash's, Professor Kurt Lash's articles. And because he's done a more thorough analysis of the history behind the 14th Amendment in Section 3, the congressional debates, and the ratification debates, not just what legislators said, but how it was understood by the public as well. You're going to get an overview of that. You're going to get argument on that. But I'm going to urge you to take a look at those others closely. And third, as we've said, we think this is legal argument and not appropriate for rules of evidence. It's in. The court will make good, will provide its analysis. And we have talked to the petitioners about just frankly including the expert reports, the law professors as demonstrative exhibits to review. That's fine. But I think what you're going to see is when I talked about the lack of firsts, there's a reason presidential candidates have not been knocked off, or no one's even attempted to, under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Okay, there's a reason this is a unique case. There's a reason cases like this have either never been brought or quickly rejected. There's reasons for that. And the reasons are grounded in the text and the language of the 14th Amendment. You're going to hear about the Secretary's authority from Ms. Hillary Rudy. This is sort of an interesting case in the sense that my understanding is petitioners are calling Ms. Rudy and haven't even spoken to her. And we haven't even spoken to her. So it's going to be an adventure. But having had some experience in that office, I'm confident you will see that this case is a radical outlier from the Secretary's past practice, in addition, obviously, to the 14th Amendment. Let's talk a little bit about the evidence before the court today, or this next week. To be sure, the petitioners have spent about 10 months preparing their case. As you have described, we've talked about this as a mantra. I'll submit volume does not equal quality. A lot of attorneys does not equal a good argument. A lot of stuff in front of the court does not equal good evidence. The court shouldn't confuse a vigorous effort with a good argument or with good evidence. If anything, the fact that they have to put on so much and make one inference and pile one argument on top of another shows the weakness of their case, not strength. After all the time they have prepared this case, this is what they've got. They've got the January 6th report. They got 2 police officers out of hundreds, perhaps thousands of police officers there. And not commanders, but 2 police officers. And they've got 3 professors. 2 law professors to testify about the law and the sociologist to testify about the coded language. That's what they've got. And they've got 1 House member. 1 House member. So that's what they've got. And at the end of the day, the start of the day, this case is frankly about the January 6th report. This is their effort to get court to endorse the January 6th report. That's what it comes down to. The video montage with overlaid sound that you saw in this opening argument, that's a pretty good production. And the reason it's a good production is because the January 6th committee hired a television producer to produce this stuff for primetime TV. The January 6th report made 411 findings. Petitioners have asked to introduce 408 of them, many of which this court has allowed conditionally and allowed argument against. But this report is poison, and I mean poison very bluntly. It is a one-sided political document of cherry-picked information, no adversarial process, with a preordained conclusion. It omits a number of other arguments. It ignored other witnesses before it. And it ignores other explanations and causes. It has very much. Let me ask you this, Honor, and obviously I'm asking rhetorically. If someone walked into court and said, hey, here's how this court case is going to work. I, on my side, the prosecutor, I'm going to get all kinds of time, years, year and a half, to investigate witnesses, to take statements, to gather evidence, okay? And people who strongly disagree with my viewpoint, they get no time whatsoever. They don't get to interview any witnesses. They don't get to get any evidence. They get none of that, but I get all of it. I get to do all of that. And on top of that, you're not going to hear the case. I'm going to choose my own panel. I'm going to choose my own judges. I'm going to choose my Democrats and a couple of Republicans that agree with me. I get to choose them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hire a television producer. And I'm going to time this for an election. And I'm going to put all that out there. And I want you to render legal opinions based on the quality of that evidence. I think you and everyone else would be would be repulsed by that process. But that's what the January 6th process was. And you are going to hear from a congressman involved in this just the deficiencies and the problems of that January 6th process. And so what the petitioners are doing is they're trying to shove this January 6th report as evidence for this court. They're asking the court to endorse that process. They're asking the court to endorse that one-sided, poisonous report. There is a reason Democrats, for the large part, love that report and cite it. And there is a reason Republicans, for the most part, hate that report and condemn it. And the reason why is that report is a political document first and foremost. This, however, is a court of law. Like you, we, like the petitioner's attorneys, have spent the majority, perhaps all of our adult working lives, as officers of the court, defending one of the greatest American institutions, one of the greatest world institutions, is fair courts that conduct themselves according to the rule of evidence, that work hard to come with good decisions. That's what we do. That's what courts do. That is not what the January 6th report was. And we should hold ourselves here to a much higher standard than that poisonous January 6th report. We should allow in only real evidence that's subject to cross-exam, that is properly authenticated by people who actually have knowledge of that. That's what this court should be about, not importing a bunch of stuff from the January 6th report that really has little, if any, credibility. You'll also hear from two police officers, and we want to be very respectful of those police officers. But like any human being, they had a very limited viewpoint on what happened on January 6th. And we're going to ask that you limit the testimony to actually what the officers knew. Not what they guessed at, not what they surmised, but what they knew and what they saw. Their actual experience. And we'll point out that, frankly, I mean, there's a reason these officers are here, and it's because of their intense dislike for President Trump. You're going to hear from a member of the House of Representatives, and we're going to give you a member of the House of Representatives too. There you have it, Your Honor. And then you're going to hear from 3 experts from the petitioners. 2 are going to testify to what the law is, and then you're going to have the sociologists, whom we've already spoken about. That's it. That's their evidence. At the end of the day, their evidence is a January 6th report. Everything they bring in is part of the January 6th report. I won't say everything, but the vast majority of it. Our evidence. I've refrained from naming witnesses. I'll continue to follow that convention. But you're going to hear that President Trump took very specific precautions to prevent violence on that day, as president. You're going to hear that the organizers of the rally at the Ellipse took precautions to avoid violence or inflammatory rhetoric. You're going to hear that the rally at the Ellipse was peaceful, that there was no violence. You didn't have a crowd that was intent on violence before or after President Trump's speech. You're going to see that President Trump's communications on January 6th called for peace. They called for respect of the police. Certainly 2 police officers that were involved in violence, you're going to see that from them. But we also have at least 1 witness who's going to say, look, I saw very, very little. I saw a peaceful crowd. Nearly everyone was peaceful. That's a different perspective. And so it's impossible, we think, to say the mob did this, or the mob did that, the mob, the mob. There are a lot of people with a lot of different actions, a lot of behavior. There was not a mind meld mob that President Trump supposedly mobilized. And then you're going to hear about how the January 6th report was a completely partisan, unreliable document. This case here is about President Trump's right to run for office. That right is the flip side of the coin for people to be able to vote for the candidate of their choice. People can't vote without candidates. Candidates aren't really candidates if people can't vote for them. It's the same side of the coin. And so we've talked about the right for the people of Colorado to vote for someone for office. And that's very closely bound with the right of Donald J. Trump to be able to run for office. And the petitioners seek to deny millions of Coloradans that right, and they seek to deny President Trump his rights. Now, I understand the posture that this is merely a state disqualification case. And it's not. This is a 14th Amendment case, and it's dressed up as a state proceeding. 95% of the evidence is the 14th Amendment. Maybe it's 92%. But the overwhelming majority of the evidence in this case is about the 14th Amendment. And the overwhelming argument is about the 14th Amendment. And the consequences are about the 14th Amendment. And it asks the court to interpret the 14th Amendment. That's what this case is about. If it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. This is a 14th Amendment case. Okay? And so I want to bring, it's a constitutional case. It's sort of what we lawyers dream of being able to litigate. We don't dream in law school of litigating Section 1204 qualifications. We dream of litigating constitutional law. And that's what this is. It's a constitutional case. And so I'm going to bring you to my last point. So I'm old enough and overweight enough to where I've been litigating election law in the state of Colorado for well over 2 decades. And this is the 3rd presidential candidate ballot access case I have litigated. Now, obviously, I'm familiar with the law nationwide. And there is a rule in election law. And that rule is called the rule of democracy. Maybe I'm making it up a little bit, but it's the rule of democracy. And that rule says that when something is close, or when there's a unique and strange argument on the other side, okay, when there's a question or an ambiguity or a stretch, the rule of democracy says we err on the side of letting people vote. That's what the rule says. Now, we've made preemption arguments. We've argued about holding office, that the 14th Amendment applies to holding office so that Congress has the choice to remove a disqualification. We shouldn't short-circuit that. We've made arguments about officer of the United States. We've made arguments about engagement, insurrection, First Amendment, all of that stuff. And to date, the court has either deferred those or oftentimes ruled against us. But what I'm asking this court to do is apply the rule of democracy. When something's close or ambiguous or a stretch or an unusual argument, you don't interpret it as a way to cancel the opportunity for people to choose their representatives. You don't interpret it as a way to cancel the ability of millions of people to be able to vote for the leader of the free world. What you do is you interpret it to allow people to vote. Because there is no doubt that the 6 electors don't like President Trump. And I would submit that maybe their attorneys don't like President Trump. And they're experts. And I know the police officers don't like President Trump. They don't like President Trump. And they have every right to vote against him. But there are millions of people in Colorado and across this country who are inspired by President Trump, who view him as someone who protects their interests and who are going to and is going to create a nation, help build a nation that they want to live in and that they want their children to live in. Millions of people look to him for hope and inspiration. And who are the petitioners to prevent those people from not being able to vote on that? Who are they? Well, we're arguing that they shouldn't be able to stop those votes. That when millions of people are inspired by a candidate, and millions of people may hate that candidate, what we need to do and what the rule of democracy says and what makes America great is we get to vote on that person. We don't stifle it. We don't short-circuit it through a court proceeding. We're confident that that's what the framers thought about when they drafted the 14th Amendment. We're confident that that's historical usage. We're confident that our legal arguments and our evidence are appropriate and carry the day. And part of the reason we're confident is because those arguments and that evidence fits within the long tradition of American democracy and of American law to allow an election to go forward rather than short-circuiting it and engaging in what we would consider anti-democratic behavior. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Do the interveners, does the Colorado Republican Party have a statement?
Yes, we do. A brief one, Your Honor. Thankfully. The Colorado Republican Party has intervened here, Your Honor, in order to urge you to vindicate the important and ultimate right of the party to select the candidates whose names will appear on the primary election ballot as Republican nominees for President of the United States. As the Supreme Court has recognized, under our political system, a basic function of a political party is to select the candidates to be offered to the voters. Indeed, a party's ability to select its candidates implicates the First Amendment right to association. And Colorado law is entirely consistent with this. Section 1204 of the Election Code requires the Secretary of State to place on the ballot, quote, only those candidates who are seeking the nomination of a political party as a bona fide candidate for President of the United States pursuant to political party rules. As the evidence will show, the rules of the Colorado Republican Party require a bona fide candidate to satisfy 3 categories of rules. First, the candidate must comply with the constitutional requirements set forth in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5, namely that the candidate be 35 years of age, be a natural-born citizen, and have lived here for 14 years. Second, the candidate must register his committee with the FEC. Third, the candidate must demonstrate enthusiasm, viability, seriousness, and competitiveness according to certain party-defined standards. President Trump has satisfied each of these requirements, and the party has certified to the Secretary of State that he is a bona fide presidential candidate affiliated with the Colorado Republican Party. The Secretary of State has no basis upon which to thwart the party's political choice and deny him a place on the ballot. As the Secretary herself acknowledges, Section 1204 does not give her the authority to evaluate whether a bona fide candidate is selected by the Colorado Republican Party would be subject to disqualification under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and for all the reasons articulated by Mr. Gessler, which I will not repeat, and we have briefed, the Constitution doesn't give the Secretary the independent right to do so, nor does it authorize this court to. Thank you.
Anything from the Secretary of State?
Very briefly, Your Honor.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. Grant Sullivan for the Secretary of State. May it please the court. It's been said that this is an extraordinary case, and the Secretary agrees. I think the video that we just saw shows that. But in many ways, this is a very typical proceeding under the Colorado Election Code, specifically Section 113. As in nearly all Section 113 actions, a group of eligible voters alleges that an election official, here the Secretary, is about to commit a breach of her duties or other wrongful act. And like other Section 113 cases, a candidate and a political party have intervened to participate. That's not at all unusual. It's also not at all unusual for the Secretary of State or other election official in a 113 action to act as a nominal respondent and await the court's direction while the real parties in interest present evidence on the factual issues. Our pleadings cite 3 examples from just the last couple of election cycles. Consistent with this history and practice, the Secretary of State does not intend to offer any evidence in her own right in this case. The Secretary, unsurprisingly, does not have any direct evidence on whether Donald Trump engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. Other parties, of course, will present evidence on that question. What the Secretary can do and will do in this case is make her Deputy Elections Director available to testify on the election administration issues that the court has signaled some interest in. We anticipate that the Deputy Elections Director will testify regarding how the Secretary's office administers Colorado's election law to ensure conformance with federal law. And that includes the presidential primary provisions in Colorado's Proposition 107. Now, at the end of the day and the beginning of the day, the Secretary believes that Donald Trump bears significant responsibility for the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. But she welcomes the court's direction on whether his actions rise to such a level as to disqualify him from appearing on the presidential primary ballot in Colorado. And she will, of course, follow the court's judgment on that question. Thank you, Your Honor.
Petitioners ready to call our first witness?
Your Honor, before that, we just wanted to get your preference on admission of exhibits. Was it appropriate to move for the unobjected to exhibits I referenced in opening now, or would you like to do that at a break? What's Your Honor's preference?
Why don't we do that at a break?
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, this is springboarding from the Secretary's counsel's request earlier, but our representative, Mr. Dave Williams, is also listed as a witness. We would ask permission to be able to have him log in either online or view the proceedings.
Any objections? That's a first. Any objection?
No objection.
No objection, Your Honor.
None from us, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor.
Of course, then.
Good morning, Your Honor. Nikhil Suss for the petitioners. Petitioners call Officer Daniel Hodges.
Sorry, I did not catch your name.
Nikhil Suss.
be seated and just make sure to speak into the microphone.
Please.
You should feel free to kind of position that screen in any way that you like. You don't need to look right into it.
Please state your name for the record.
My name is Daniel Hodges.
And where do you currently work?
I currently work for the Metropolitan Police Department of Washington, D.C.
And what is your rank?
I am an officer.
When did you join the D.C. Police Department?
Joined the D.C. Police Department in December of 2014, so I've been on for almost 9 years now.
And what was your job prior to joining the D.C. Police Department?
Prior to joining the D.C. Police Department, I joined the Virginia National Guard in 2012. I served a 6-year contract and was honorably discharged in 2018.
What divisions are you assigned to at the D.C. Police Department?
At MPD, I am assigned to patrol in the 4th District. I am also assigned to Civil Disturbance Unit 42.
And how long have you been a member of Civil Disturbance Unit 42?
I've been with Civil Disturbance Unit 42, or CDU 42, since its inception, approximately 5 years.
And what is the Civil Disturbance Unit?
Civil Disturbance Unit is an organization within MPD that officers are assigned to, specific platoons. We are activated and deployed to planned First Amendment assemblies on an as-needed basis. Once we are there, we perform law enforcement duties around that First Amendment assembly, be it traffic control or just high visibility, making our presence known, and should they turn riotous, we police that as well.
And what duties do you perform as a member of the Civil Disturbance Unit?
As a member of CD42, I perform all the duties that I just described. CD42 is also what's called a rapid response platoon. That means that we are issued hard gear pads that are not standardized that are not standard to all CDU members, so we use those as well.
Do you use any other sort of special equipment as a member of the CDU?
I do. CDU officers are issued ballistic helmets, gas masks, riot batons, and then the hard gear, the pads I just told you about.
And as a member of the CDU, do you receive special training?
We do. CDU members are trained in ways to move in formations as a group, effectively utilize ourselves in a crowd or formations, and how to make arrests and protect ourselves and others in the event of a criminal person on assembly. Right.
Does the CDU respond to civil disturbances anywhere in Washington, D.C., or only in particular areas of the city?
Typically, MPD's CDU units respond to areas under a local city, under the control of the local city. However, we also respond to property that belongs to our federal partners should they request our assistance.
I'd like to turn now to the morning of January 6, 2021. Were you on assignment with the Civil Disturbance Unit that morning?
I was.
Were you aware of any proceedings happening at the U.S. Capitol building that day?
I was.
What was that?
I was aware that at the United States Capitol that day, they were certifying the 2020 presidential election with Congress and the Vice President.
And what were your initial orders?
Initially, my platoon was ordered to respond to around 11th and Constitution in the morning of January 6th in a high visibility capacity, which means that we simply stood on Constitution Avenue, making ourselves visible, letting people know that the police were present.
And about what time was that?
We probably arrived on scene around 8 in the morning.
And were you monitoring a particular event?
We were monitoring Donald Trump's rally on the ellipse.
As you were monitoring the crowd, did you notice anything unusual about how they were dressed?
As I was monitoring the crowd, I noticed that there were multiple people who were wearing tactical gear. That some had helmets like my own ballistic helmets, goggles, gas masks, armored gloves, backpacks full of gear that we couldn't identify, tactical boots, some earpieces for radios, things of that nature.
How did you feel seeing those people wearing tactical gear?
It made me very uncomfortable, nervous.
Why is that?
Because there's no need for all that tactical gear to listen to a politician speak in a park.
While you were deployed on Constitution Avenue, did you have any other cause for concern about what would happen that day?
I did. While I was on Constitution Avenue, I was monitoring our radio frequency we were using that day for the First Men of Assembly. I heard our gun recovery unit, our GRU unit, or GRU rather, was identifying people in the crowd who had firearms or that thought potentially had firearms. They were identifying them so they could make arrests later on or at the time as need be. I also heard our explosive ordnance disposal unit, EOD, come over the air and say that they had identified a device on the Capitol grounds. They also said that the device was viable, and I took this to mean that they had found the bomb.
Did the crowd stay at the site of President Trump's rally at the Ellipse?
Largely the crowd, after staying in the Ellipse for some time, flowed back in the opposite direction on Constitution Avenue towards the United States Capitol.
And what was the general tenor of the crowd as they were moving towards the Capitol building?
The crowd, as they were moving toward the Capitol, were moving with a sense of purpose. It seemed like they were moving as they had something to do there, even though ostensibly the event they were there to attend had concluded or come close to it.
Was your platoon eventually deployed to the Capitol?
We were. We were monitoring the radio, and we heard our commander that day getting more and more agitated as people continued to flow toward the United States Capitol. You could tell from the way he was talking, the crowd was becoming aggressive and attacking and overwhelming the defenses present. Eventually, he requested CD-42 to back them up at the Capitol, at which time we went back to our vans that we used to transport ourselves, put on our hard gear, and made our way toward the Capitol grounds.
And about what time did you receive the order to deploy to the Capitol?
I believe it was about 1:30.
And what was your understanding of why you were being deployed to the Capitol?
We were being deployed to the Capitol to reinforce the defense there, to prevent people who were attacking officers from gaining entry to the Capitol.
Prior to January 6, 2021, had you ever been called to respond to civil unrest at the U.S. Capitol building?
No.
What did you do after receiving that order to deploy to the Capitol?
After receiving the order to deploy to the Capitol, we, as I said, we went back to vans, made our way toward the Capitol grounds. We made our way toward the, I'd say, northwestern edge of the Capitol grounds, where we got out on foot, organized ourselves into two columns, and started marching toward the west terrace of the Capitol.
I want to focus now on the hours, between the hours of 1:50 p.m. to 3:10 p.m. Could you tell us what happened when you arrived at the Capitol building?
When we arrived at the Capitol, as I said, we organized ourselves into two columns, started marching toward the west terrace. The crowd at the edges of the Capitol grounds were more spread out, less aggressive. However, they quickly identified us and started hurling insults at us, calling us traitors, oath breakers, telling us to remember our oaths, telling us to be on the right side of history. But we ignored them and moved on. As we got closer to the west terrace, the crowd became more dense and more aggressive until eventually we were attacked. Our assailants cut us in half, whereas the forward part of our element was able to keep moving toward the west terrace. The rear portion, which I was a part of, was cut off and encircled by our assailants, and we were attacked at that point and had to defend ourselves there.
Over the course of the day, how did the crowd attack you?
The crowd attacked me in a variety of ways, punching, kicking, pushing. Chemical irritants such as OC spray or pepper spray. I was beaten in the head with blunt instruments, including my own riot baton. I was pinned and crushed with a police shield. I can't remember all the different ways in which I was assaulted.
Did you sustain injuries?
I did.
Which injuries?
I experienced pain and bruising about my body and a swollen hand. I had a large lacerations in the face, bleeding from the mouth, and pain in my eye from where someone attempted to gouge it out.
Tell us what was going through your head when you were being attacked that day.
I was afraid. I was afraid for my life and for that of my colleagues. I was afraid for the people in the United States Capitol building. I was afraid for Congress, Vice President, and what these people would do to them and how it would affect our democracy.
Over the course of the day, did you see your fellow officers attacked?
I did.
How?
In very much the same way as I was attacked, punching, kicking, pushing, being struck with blunt instruments. I unfortunately couldn't pay too much attention to the ways in which they were being attacked as I had my hands full myself.
Over the course of the day, did you see the attackers use weapons?
I did.
What types?
They used flagpoles that they had brought as blunt instruments to beat us with. They used stolen police equipment such as riot batons, police shields to assault us. They used pieces of what's called bike rack style barriers, which they had broken into its constituent pieces. The poles passed out amongst the mob to attack us. And pepper spray, chemical irritants. That's all I can think of.
And you testified earlier that you saw people on the morning of January 6th wearing tactical gear. Is that right?
That's correct.
At the Capitol, did you see individuals in the crowd wearing similar types of tactical gear?
I did.
And did you observe any behavior by the crowd indicating why they were at the Capitol building?
I did.
Your Honor, I just want to be very careful because I've read some of his prior testimony, and he has a definite tendency to mind read. So I want to be very careful that he limits himself to what he actually observed and not try to get into the head and speculate about what was going through the heads of individual members of the crowd or the crowd as a whole.
Okay, he hasn't testified as to any of those things, so I'm going to overrule the objection, and if and when he does, you can make a request to strike.
Do you need me to repeat the question?
Please.
Did you observe any behavior by the crowd indicating why they were at the Capitol?
I did. I saw the crowd carrying flags with Trump campaign slogans on it, advertising Trump for 2020, which was confusing as the 2020 presidential election was over. I saw them carrying banners that said "Stop the Steal," and it's my understanding that this slogan means that the bearers believe that the 2020 presidential election was somehow stolen.
Objection, Your Honor. Unless he has a basis for saying what that slogan meant to any particular person carrying it, that is pure speculation.
Overruled, but would you just make sure when you make the objections to speak in the microphone?
Yes, Your Honor.
And you don't need to stand up if you don't want to.
I saw people carrying banners saying "Stop the Steal," which, based on my understanding, means that people believed the 2020 presidential election was stolen, which was confusing to me, as I was not aware of any evidence that this was the case. I heard them chant "Fight for Trump," which seems very to the point. They were carrying various flags referencing war and revolution. They told us that we were on the wrong side of history when we were defending the United States Capitol and the peaceful transfer of power.
Did members of the crowd reference President Trump?
They did.
How?
By the clothes they wore, the banners they carried saying "Fight for Trump," they called, referenced Joe Biden as a tyrant, things of that nature.
Over the course of the day, did you get a sense of how big the crowd was?
I did. It was difficult to gauge on the ground where I was, and I have no formal training in crowd estimates.
How did the size of the mob compare to the size of law enforcement that were present that day?
I was, the mob outnumbered us a great deal. I'd say 50 or 70 to 1.
What impact, if any, did the size of the mob have on your ability to do your job that day?
The size of the mob was the greatest weapon utilized by the mob that day, or rather, most effectively utilized, I should say. They had us completely outnumbered. They had us encircled. We were unable to escape should we need to get out of there for medical attention. We were unable to easily receive reinforcements. There were no uniformed differentiating people who were violent from people who were not. So the mob aided and abetted those who were violent in that way, as those who were violent would then fall back into the crowd and we would be unable to engage them.
Officer Hodges, just pause for a second. So I think there was an objection trying to be made.
Yes, Your Honor. The objection is he continually talks about the mob as if all the individuals in the crowd were acting with a single mind or a single intent, when clearly
This is against a cross-examination point. He can use the words that he chooses to use. So overruled. I think you probably need to remind him who he was.
Officer Hodges, I was asking you, did the size of the mob have your what impact did the size of the mob have on your ability to do your job that day?
That's right. It was the most effective weapon utilized by the mob. We had to treat everyone as a threat, and in that way, we couldn't focus on people who were violent. Our attention was divided so thinly that it was difficult to engage and protect ourselves and others.
How, if at all, did the size of the mob impact your ability to use firearms?
The size of the mob made it extremely difficult to use firearms. While there were those in the mob who at times used force or assaulted us in ways that were likely to cause serious bodily injury or death, we could not, it made it extremely difficult to engage them legally with firearms, as we are not allowed to shoot into a crowd. As the crowd was largely the main element present, and very rarely did we encounter individuals that we could not handle one-on-one, it made it so that firearms were an extremely risky proposition, both legally and morally.
How, if at all, did the size of the mob impact your ability to make arrests?
The size of the mob made it impossible to make arrests. When we make a custodial arrest, we are legally obligated to the safety, security, and medical treatment of our prisoner. These are things that we could not guarantee for ourselves at the time, let alone members of Congress and the Vice President inside, let alone, again, any prisoners we might want to take. Again, if we took a prisoner, typically that requires 2 officers to guard them at all times, and we needed every officer we had to assist in the defense. And so taking prisoners at that time was simply untenable.
How, if at all, did the size of the mob impact the ability of emergency medical personnel to render aid to individuals at the Capitol?
As far as I can tell, the Capitol was encircled. There was no way for medical personnel to access the Capitol. So the mob made it impossible for us to receive professional medical care.
What about nonviolent people in the mob? How, if at all, did they impact your ability to do your job?
Nonviolent people in the mob were still part of the crowd. They created all the problems that I had previously testified to.
So, Officer Hodges, are D.C. Metro police officers required to wear body cameras when they're on duty?
We are.
Were you wearing your department-issued body camera on January 6, 2021?
I was.
And was your body camera activated when you were on the U.S. Capitol grounds?
It was.
Mr. Hain, please pull up what's been admitted as Exhibit 10 and pause the video. Officer Hodges, can you see the video on your screen?
I can.
What is this?
This depicts me and my platoon walking towards the West Terrace on January 6, 2021.
Okay, I'm going to stand up and apologize because I think I probably
Oh, okay. I can go back and do that for this. So, Officer Hodges, can you see what's on your screen?
I can.
What is this?
This is my body-worn camera recording from January 6, 2021.
And does the footage fairly and accurately depict what you witnessed on January 6, 2021?
It does.
Your Honor, move to admit Exhibit 10.
Your Honor, we haven't yet seen the video, so I'm not sure how he can state that it accurately depicts what he saw that day.
Okay, but presumably he's seen it before and you've had access to it, so do you have an objection?
Your Honor, may I speak?
Sure, but in general, I'd like to limit whoever is to one party, but
Absolutely. Your Honor, I understand the procedural posture of this case. Normally, you listen to the video, he looks at the whole thing, he authenticates it, then the time for objection or admission. I guess our preference is, I understand that this has been admitted already. I understand we've seen it. I understand. But just for purposes of the record, we think that may be the best way to do it. But if you want to provide guidance otherwise, we're willing to follow.
okay, so I want to make clear, you made some objections to exhibits and I overruled some of that objections. That doesn't mean that it's admitted into evidence. It needs to be presented at trial to actually be admitted into evidence. And so I think that he's offering to admit it. I assume you object. If you do, let's get it on the record and proceed. Does that make sense?
There's text underneath it. If we can just listen to it and, if the text reflects what was said, we're not going to object.
Okay, perfect.
Let me put it that way.
Why don't we play the video?
Please play the video. Let's stop the video at 13:59:53. Officer Hodges, let me ask you first. Do you see the numbers in the top right corner of the screen?
I do.
What are those numbers?
The first set of numbers is the date, 2021-01-06. The second set of numbers is the time at which the recording was taken in the 24-hour clock, 13:59. In this 12-hour clock, it would be 1:59 p.m.
Now, in this point in the video, where are you headed?
Currently, we are headed toward the West Terrace.
And what types of things are people shouting in the video?
In the video, people are shouting at us, calling us oath breakers, traitors, telling us to remember our oaths. We're on the wrong side of history, that sort of thing.
And how did you interpret those words at the time?
At the time, I interpreted those words to mean that the people shouting us.
Objection, Your Honor. His interpretation of those shouts is irrelevant to any issue in this case. The shouts were made, but what he understood them to mean is irrelevant.
Objection overruled.
I understood the shouts to mean that the people who were shouting at us, which was everyone in the mob that I could perceive, disapproved of us being there. They understood that we were there to protect the Capitol, which was antithetical to their goals. That by protecting the United States Capitol, we were somehow breaking our oaths to the Constitution, that we were traitors to the United States.
And why did you and your fellow officers have your hands on each other's shoulders in the video?
We put our hands on each other's shoulders spontaneously as the crowd became more dense and aggressive in an effort to try and keep ourselves from getting separated.
Had you ever done that prior to January 6, 2021?
No, we had not.
Mr. Hain, please resume the video at timestamp 13:59:53. Let's pause the video at 14:00:35. Officer Hodges, could you describe what we just saw?
In the video, my platoon, rather, we were making our way towards the West Terrace when we were attacked by the mob. I was assaulted in various ways that I've testified to, and someone attempted to steal my riot baton. I wrestled with control of the baton and was able to retain my weapon. When we fended off the initial assault, we were encircled by the mob, at which point they started yelling at us, telling us that we're on the wrong team, which suggested to me that they were going against our efforts to defend the United States Capitol.
Mr. Hain, please resume the video at 14:00:35. Let's pause the video at 14:01:20. Officer Hodges, do you see the man wearing a vest in the video?
I do.
What kind of vest is that?
It appears to be an external carrier vest designed to carry within it a ballistic panel that would protect the wearer from firearms. And judging from the way it's bulging outward, it appears to carry such a panel.
Okay, Mr. Hain, please pull up what's been admitted as Exhibit 11 and hit pause. Officer Hodges, can you see the video on your screen?
I can.
What is this?
This further depicts the time in which we were making our way, we were trying to fight off the mob and make our way to the West Terrace.
Is this your body camera footage from January 6, 2021?
It is.
Did you review this footage prior to your testimony today?
I did.
Does the footage fairly and accurately depict the events you witnessed on January 6th?
It does.
Your Honor, at this time we would move to admit Exhibit 11.
Let's go back to 10. You asked to admit it. I didn't rule. Counsel for interviewer Trump, I think, wanted to wait to decide whether to make an objection.
We have no objection to Exhibit 10.
Okay, 10 is admitted. I'll let you play 11, and then I'll let you give them an opportunity to make an objection if they would like to.
Sure. Please play Exhibit 11. Let's pause the video at 14:02:41. Now would be appropriate time to move to admit, Your Honor?
Is that the end of the video?
That is the end of this clip, yes.
Okay. Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibit 11 submitted.
Officer Hodges, could you describe what we just saw?
Yes. I had attempted to forge a path through the mob for the rest of my platoon to follow so we could join the defense of the West Terrace. However, I looked back and saw that my platoon was again being assaulted by the mob. Their forward progress effectively halted and being pushed back. I backtracked, started pulling off members of the mob by their backpacks until someone observed me and then assaulted me as well. They tried to steal my right baton again. We wrestled for control. I was elbowed. We went to the ground, kicked in the chest, at which point I ended up on my hands and knees with the medical mask I was wearing pulled up over my eyes. So I was blind for a moment.
And looking at Exhibit 11 at timestamp 14:02:41, what type of vest is the man wearing in the video?
The man appears to be wearing an external carrier vest designed to carry within it a ballistic panel. And again, judging from the way it's bulging outward, it appears to carry such a panel.
Your Honor, this video does actually contain more content on it, so I prematurely moved to admit it. And frankly, to explain myself, I thought that these videos were previously admitted. And so, could we watch the rest of the video and then I move to admit it again? Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Hain, please resume the video at timestamp 14:02:41. Pause the video at 14:03:20. Officer Hodges, did you hear what the man said in the video?
I did.
What did he say?
He wanted to get me out of there. I told him, he asked me what he could do to help. I told him to leave. He said that ain't gonna happen. And he said it's gonna turn bad. And that the others were coming up from the back.
And what did you understand those words to mean?
Objection. His understanding is irrelevant. It's speculative and he lacks foundation.
Overruled, and he can testify as to what somebody said to him, what he thought it meant. Doesn't mean that's what they meant. It means it's what he thought they meant. Objection overruled.
I understood the words he told me were very concerning. He said that it was going to turn bad, which means that he didn't think it was bad yet, and it was going to get worse. He said that the others were coming up from the back. This indicated to me that there was pre-planning, coordination, and that they were intentionally encircling the United States Capitol.
And when the man asked what he could do to help, you said leave, is that right?
That's correct.
Why did you say that?
Because aside from convincing other people to leave as well, that is the only thing he could do to help. His presence there was the biggest problem to us, that he was a part of the mob, and the mob was the threat.
Mr. Hain, please pull up Exhibit 12 and press pause. Yes, Your Honor, at this time we move to admit Exhibit 11.
No objection.
11's admitted.
And now could we pull up Exhibit 12, Mr. Hain? Officer Hodges, can you see the video on your screen?
I can.
What is this?
This further depicts our time on the Capitol grounds as we make our way towards the West Terrace, we being the remnant of CD-42 that was attacked.
Is this your body camera footage from January 6, 2021?
It is.
Did you review this footage prior to your testimony today?
I did.
Does the footage fairly and accurately depict what you witnessed on January 6, 2021?
It does.
And if we could play the video starting at 14:03:57. Officer Hodges, could you describe what we just saw?
The video depicts me as I once again attempt to forge a path through the mob for the rest of my platoon to follow as we make our way towards the West Terrace. This time I was successful. I was able to push my way through. We made our way toward the area in front of the West Terrace where we joined a police line being held there.
And could you describe what you saw in the crowd as you ran through them?
In the crowd, I saw people destroying property, breaking down the bike rack style barriers into its poles, which I saw in the day used as weapons. I saw an agitator with a megaphone encouraging further violence. I saw munitions going off, chaos. No one obeying our lawful orders to go home.
And the people in the crowd you're running through, did every one of them try to physically attack you?
No.
So did the people just peacefully standing there impede your ability to do your job that day?
Yes.
How's that?
Even the people who I didn't observe attacking us, made it difficult for us to analyze the threats, engage those who were violent, and because we had no idea who was going to become violent or who would not, the crowd made it so that the mob, when they fell back, had a defense that made it very difficult for us to deal with.
And did you hear the alarm sound playing in the video?
I did.
What was that?
That is our LRAD system, which is like a loud speaker system. It's deployed when a First Amendment assembly becomes unlawful or is unlawful. It broadcasts a very loud order to disperse, and it's very, very audible.
And where the crowd was standing in the area depicted in the video, was that area open to the general public?
No.
What, if any, chemical irritants did the police deploy that day?
That day, I understand the police deployed OC spray or pepper spray and CS gas or tear gas.
In your experience as a member of the Civil Disturbance Unit, what do crowds typically do after the police deploy chemical irritants?
In my experience, crowds typically disperse when confronted with chemical irritants. It's very persuasive in getting them to change their minds about what they're trying to do. Gets them to break up into individuals instead of continuing to function as a single group.
Mr. Hain, please resume the video at timestamp 14:04:30. Let's stop at 14:04:45. Officer Hodges, looking at the video, where on the Capitol grounds are you located at this point in the video?
At this point in the video, I am in front of the West Terrace.
And is there a police line shown in the video?
There is.
What, if anything, happened to that police line that day?
Later on, the mob was able to break through the police line.
Your Honor, at this time we'd move to admit Exhibit 12.
No objection.
Exhibit 12 is admitted. Are you going to be moving on to another exhibit?
Yes.
Okay, let's take a break from 10:15 to 10:30. We're going to resume afterwards. Did you need something, Mr. Kessler?
No, I'm just,
Stretching your legs.
I've had 4 glasses of water.
So at 10:30, we will be back on the record.
Complete video. At this time, we would move to admit Exhibit 13.
No objection.
13 is admitted.
Mr. Hain, could you pull up Exhibit 14 at timestamp 14:25:11? Officer Hodges, do you see the video on your screen?
I do.
Is this your body camera footage from January 6, 2021?
It is.
Did you review this footage prior to your testimony today?
I did.
Does the footage fairly and accurately depict the events of January 6, 2021 as you remember them?
It does.
Mr. Hain, please play the video.
Weapons! Take off your badges! Take off your hats and show solidarity with we the people, or we're gonna run over you! We're gonna run over you! Do you think your little t-shirt guns are gonna stop this crowd? No! We're going into that building! Take off your badges! Take off your guns! Jesus!
Officer Hodges, did you hear the man speaking in the video?
I did.
How did you interpret his statements at the time?
At the time, I interpreted his statements as an attempt to coerce us into joining their assault on the Capitol. He explicitly asks us to take off our badges and put down our weapons and join them. He says that if we don't, then they will run over us. He then references our guns, saying that, do you think those little pea shooters are going to stop us? This was particularly concerning to me, that it meant that he was willing to withstand lethal force that we might use, and in his efforts to achieve his objectives.
Your Honor, at this time, we would move to admit Exhibit 14.
No objection.
Exhibit 14 is admitted.
Mr. Hain, please pull up Exhibit 15 at timestamp 14:28:45. Officer Hodges, do you see the video on your screen?
I do.
Is this your body camera footage from January 6, 2021?
It is.
Did you review this video prior to your testimony today?
I did.
Does the video fairly and accurately depict the events of January 6, 2021 as you recall them?
It does.
Mr. Hain, please play the video. We're stopping the video at 14:30:33. Officer Hodges, could you describe what we just saw?
The video depicts the police line in front of the West Terrace. At the time, it was breached by the mob. The mob was able to breach the line. They pushed through us, and the sheer size and number of people involved made it impossible to get the line back where it was. They continued to assault us, push us back. We were beaten, pushed, kicked. I was overwhelmed by members of the mob, being pushed back by several at once until I was pushed back against that waist back high wall you see in the video. I was held there while one of the assailants attempted to gouge out my eye. And I was able to repel the attackers, and we were forced to retreat.
Officer Hodges, how did the assailant try to gouge out your eye?
He grabbed my face and stuck his thumb in my eye and pushed it in and tried to dig it out as best he could.
So the timestamp at the start of this video was around 2:28 p.m. Is that about when the time the mob started to surge?
That's correct.
Had you ever seen a crowd break through a police line like that before?
No.
To your knowledge, prior to this point, had the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department ever had to fall back from a police line because a crowd broke through it?
No.
Did you hear the man in the video say, "This is our house"?
I did.
What did you understand those words to mean?
Objection, relevance,
Overruled.
foundation as well.
You may testify as to what you understood it to mean.
At the time, I understood the assailants' words, "This is our house," to mean that they had the right to be there, or they believed they had the right to be there, that they had the right to enter whenever they wanted, and they had the right to decide what went on, and more pertinently, what did not go on inside the United States Capitol.
Over the course of the day, did you hear other individuals say, "This is our house"?
I did.
Your Honor, at this time, we would move to admit Exhibit 15.
No objection.
Exhibit 15 is admitted.
Mr. Hain, please pull up Exhibit 16, starting at timestamp 14:30:44, and pause the video. Officer Hodges, do you see the video on your screen?
I do.
Is this your body camera footage from January 6, 2021?
It is.
Did you review this footage prior to your testimony today?
I did.
Is this footage a fair and accurate depiction of the events of January 6, 2021, as you recall them?
It is.
Please play the video. Officer Hodges, could you describe what we just saw?
As we were retreating from the police line being broken on in front of the West Terrace, I observed a man who was on the ground and had a large knife on his belt. Other officers were attempting to disarm him of his knife, and I assisted while another officer took possession of the knife.
To your knowledge, was this man arrested at the scene?
No.
Why not?
As I previously testified, the current conditions that you see in the video made it untenable to make arrests. We could not guard him adequately with our manpower nor provide for his safety, security, and medical treatment.
Your Honor, at this time we would move to admit Exhibit 16.
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 16 is admitted.
Mr. Hain, please pull up Exhibit 17, starting at timestamp 14:32:15, and press pause. Officer Hodges, do you see the video on your screen?
Yes,
Is this your body camera footage from January 6, 2021?
it is.
Did you review this footage prior to your testimony today?
I did.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of the events of January 6, 2021, as you recall them?
It is.
Please play the video.
Thank you so much, man.
Officer Hodges, just to orient us, can you describe where you started at the beginning of the video and then where you ended up?
At the beginning of the video, I was in front of the West Terrace. I ascended the stairs of the inaugural stage up to the West Terrace proper.
And looking at the timestamp currently showing on Exhibit 17, it says 14:13:11. So this is approximately 2:33 p.m. Is that right?
14:33, is that what you mean?
Yes.
Correct.
And by this time, 2:33 p.m., were the police still in control of where you were standing on the West Terrace of the Capitol?
Yes.
Were the police able to maintain control of the West Terrace of the Capitol the rest of the day?
No.
Your Honor, at this time we would move to admit Exhibit 17.
No objection.
Exhibit 17 is admitted.
Mr. Hain, please pull up Exhibit 18, starting at timestamp 14:36:10. Officer Hodges, do you see the video on your screen?
I do.
Is this more of your body camera footage from January 6, 2021?
It is.
Did you review this footage prior to your testimony today?
I did.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of the events of January 6, 2021, as you recall them?
It is.
Please play the video. Let's pause the video at 14:37:06. Officer Hodges, just to orient us again, can you walk us through where you started at the beginning of the video and then where you ended up?
At the beginning of the video, I was on the West Terrace. I then entered the doorway and into the tunnel that connects the West Terrace to the room that was the crypt.
And who was coughing in the video?
That was me.
Why were you coughing?
I was experiencing the effects of CS gas or tear gas in the air.
Your Honor, at this time we would move to admit Exhibit 18.
No objection.
Admitted.
Mr. Hain, please pull up Exhibit 19, starting at timestamp 19:54:38. Officer Hodges, do you see the video on your screen?
Yes.
Is this more of your body camera footage from January 6, 2021?
Yes.
Did you review this video prior to your testimony today?
I did.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of the events of January 6, 2021, as you recall them?
Yes.
Could you tell us where you're located at this point in the video? Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. Could we please play the video? Now, Officer Hodges, could you tell us where you're located at this point in the video?
At this point in the video, I am in the tunnel that connects the West Terrace to the crypt.
So you were on the other side of the tunnel that you had previously seen walking through in the prior video?
Correct.
And can you describe what was happening in the video?
In the video, we are forming a line inside the tunnel, attempting to defend that entrance from the mob.
And could you describe the scene inside of that tunnel?
The scene inside the tunnel was a sensory overload. It was chaotic. It was extremely loud. There was alarms going off. Lots of people yelling. There were chemical munitions in the air, strobe lights, and intense body contact. We, as we got closer to where the assailants in the police line was, the more compressed everyone got until it was a lot of pressure being exerted on you.
By this point in the day, around 2:55 p.m., had the mob taken control of the West Terrace of the Capitol?
Yes.
What was your belief of what would happen if the mob broke through that police line in that tunnel?
At the time, we had no idea if the mob was able to gain entry into the Capitol building through any other means. We believed that if they were to defeat our line in the tunnel, they would have unfettered access to the Capitol itself and make good on all their threats.
Threats against whom?
Congress, Vice President.
Did you hear the officers in the video say interlock the shields?
Yes.
And what does that mean?
Some of our police shields are designed by their shape to be able to interlock with each other when placed next to each other in a certain way. This allows them to function as a single shield and thus eliminates the vulnerability of having two individual shields as individual pieces of equipment.
Prior to January 6, 2021, had you ever used that interlocking shield function?
I have not.
At this time, Your Honor, we move to admit Exhibit 19.
No objection.
Exhibit 19 is admitted. Officer Hodges, could you just explain for the court exactly, like, I'm not sure I understand this tunnel, like, a tunnel from where to where, and yeah.
It's commonly referred to as the tunnel, but it's a hallway. It just connects the outside, the terrace where I was, to the inside of the Capitol itself. It's a hallway.
In my mind, it was some sort of underground tunnel, so.
Mr. Hain, please pull up Exhibit 20 and pause the video. Officer Hodges, do you see the video on your screen?
I do.
And what does this video show?
This video shows the inside of the tunnel connecting the West Terrace to the crypt. Well, we were defending it from the mob who was trying to gain entry to the Capitol.
Did you review this video prior to your testimony today?
I did.
And is it a fair and accurate depiction of the events from January 6, 2021, as you remember them?
It is.
Please play the video.
Just go home, okay? You see me, just go home. Everybody, go home.
Officer Hodges, can you describe what we just saw?
The video depicts the time at which I moved to the front of the police line inside the tunnel connecting the West Terrace to the crypt, and when I was attempting to repel the attackers. I had positioned myself in front of a metal rigid door frame in an attempt to use it to support my efforts to push forward. Unfortunately, at that time, the momentum had shifted, and our assailants had me pushed back and pinned me against the door frame with a police shield. At that time, one of my assailants took advantage of my vulnerability, grabbing my gas mask on my face, pushing and pulling rapidly, effectively punching me in the face several times, and then ripping it off my head. He was able to, at the time, my arms were pinned to my sides. I was effectively defenseless. With this in mind, he was able to rip away my right baton and then strike me in the head with it. At that point, I was experiencing all the effects of the day, various assaults, the head trauma I just endured, chemical irritants, and crushing pressure from the crowd. And my second field, my senses diminishing. I was still trapped though, so I did the only thing I could do, call for help. Fortunately, other officers were able to extricate me from my position, and I fell back to the rear of the tunnel.
Did you hear the mob shouting "heave ho"?
I did.
What was your understanding of what they were doing?
The mob shouting "heave ho," I understood to be them coordinating their efforts in order to break through our defensive line. They were synchronizing their movement to multiply the force that applied and use their bodies to break through our line and gain access to the Capitol.
Now, the body camera video we previously watched, Exhibit 19, showed you in the tunnel around 2:55 p.m., according to the timestamp on that video. Is that right?
That's correct.
Approximately how long after 2:55 p.m. Did the events shown in this video, Exhibit 20, take place?
Approximately 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, so around 3:05 or 3:10?
That's correct.
Your Honor, at this time we would move to admit Exhibit 20.
No objection.
Admitted.
Officer Hodges, how long did you remain in the tunnel after 3:10?
I did not remain in the tunnel for very long at that point. I fell back to the crypt to convalesce as best I could. However, the fight was still ongoing, and we needed every body we had in the defense of the Capitol. So I went back out there. I no longer had my gas mask and a lot of my equipment. I was afraid I would be a liability in the tunnel. So I ascended a stair nearby, back out to the West Terrace, and joined a police line that was there. I remained on that line until reinforcements started to arrive from outside agencies, at which point I returned to the crypt and waited there.
Mr. Hain, could you please pull down the video? Officer Hodges, when you left the tunnel, did you still have your body camera on you?
I did not.
What happened to it?
It either fell off or was ripped off my chest where it's mounted and fell to the ground where it remained until another officer found it the following day.
And did you retrieve it at some point from that officer?
Through my agency, it returned to my possession, yes.
And so what did you do for the remainder of the day after you left the crypt?
Back in the crypt, I waited while members of my platoon gradually gathered, and we waited until we were all assembled, at which point we stood by, waiting for further orders. We stayed there until around midnight, at which point we were told that we were able to clear the Capitol. We left the Capitol grounds. Those who needed immediate medical attention went to hospitals. Those of us who did not were still on duty. We reported to downtown and
How would you characterize the events you witnessed on January 6, 2021?
The events on January 6, 2021 at the United States Capitol were horrific. It was a terrorist attack on the United States of America, an assault on democracy, and an attempt to prevent the peaceful transfer of power.
About how many protest events have you worked as a member of the Civil Disturbance Unit?
Dozens.
How did the events of January 6, 2021 compare to those other experiences you've had as a member of the CDU?
The events of January 6 are incomparable to any other riots or protests or First Amendment assemblies I have policed. There is just no comparison in the level of violence and stakes.
And what were you fighting for on January 6th?
On January 6th, I was fighting for
Overruled.
On January 6th, I was fighting for democracy. I was fighting for the safety and well-being of the members of Congress, the Vice President, the congressional staff who were in the building that day. I was fighting for myself, for my colleagues, and everyone who participates in our democracy.
Thank you, Officer Hodges. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
I may want that a little later, but not yet. Officer Hodges, there were multiple demonstrations.
Mr. Shaw, can you move the microphone here taller so we can
Sure.
you're speaking into it?
Sure thing. Is that better? Officer Hodges, how many demonstrations were there in Washington, D.C. on January 6th?
I'm only aware of what transpired at the Capitol and the one at the Ellipse.
Okay. Are you aware that there were people who spoke at the Supreme Court?
No.
Are you aware that there were people who spoke at other venues in Washington, D.C. that day?
No.
Are you aware that there were protesters who did not attend any of the events where people spoke?
No.
You said that you thought there were, based on your view of the crowd that day, there were at least thousands of people present. Is that correct?
Correct.
How many people attended demonstrations in Washington, D.C. overall that day?
I don't have the exact number.
Okay. Have you heard any estimates of the number who were in attendance at various demonstrations that day?
At the Capitol, I heard, or I've read of a number around 9,400.
Okay. Have you heard an overall number in excess of 120,000?
No.
Is it your position that all of the people who attended demonstrations in Washington, D.C. that day were members of what you called the mob?
If there are demonstrations that were not part of the assault on the Capitol, then no.
So the mob, if I understand you correctly, you're defining as just the subset of people who assaulted the Capitol?
Correct.
And as you sit here today, are you able to tell me what percentage of what you call the mob attended President Trump's speech at the Ellipse?
No.
are you able to tell me what percentage of what you call the mob listened to President Trump's speech at the Ellipse?
No.
Now, several times you said the mob did this, the mob said this, I saw the mob do this, or words to that effect. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay. Fair to say what you're really saying was, I saw individuals in what I call the mob do this or say this, correct?
A mob is composed of individuals, so yes.
Okay. And there were other people who were standing there who did not do or say those things, right?
That's correct.
And some portion of the people who were standing there were there and did not physically assault anybody, right?
I did not. There were times where I observed people and they were not assaulting anyone, correct?
And there were other demonstrators in Washington, D.C. that day who did not form part of the mob as you define it, correct?
I'm only aware of what transpired at the Ellipse and at the Capitol.
Okay. Now, fair to say that you were not able to read minds, right?
That is fair to say.
And just by looking at someone who was there that day, you weren't able to tell if that person attended the speech at the Ellipse, correct?
That's correct.
Or if that person had heard the speech, right?
Correct.
Or for that matter, if that person had ever read a tweet by President Trump, correct?
Correct.
Would you put up Exhibit 14, please? And just pause it right at the very beginning. Whoever was working the... Yeah, okay, great. Joanna's doing it, okay. So, for example, if we look at this picture, you can't tell whether this woman on the left in the striped shirt, you can't tell whether she attended the speech on the Ellipse, correct?
I cannot tell that by looking at her. No.
Or in any other way, right?
Correct.
And the man behind her who a few moments later was going to yell at you, you can't tell whether he attended that speech, right?
Correct.
Or any of the other people in that picture, right?
Correct.
Or in fact, any of the other people in any of the other film exhibits that we saw earlier today, right?
I cannot identify individuals who attended the speech and then were at the Capitol.
Or who read any of President Trump's tweets, correct?
Correct.
Now, I wanted to clear up a couple of things that just wasn't clear about from your testimony. At one point you said that and I forget the exact name of it, but you said there was a gun unit?
Gun recovery unit?
Gun recovery unit, that's it, thank you. And you said, I believe, that they identified people who either had weapons or who they thought might have weapons. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you know how many people have been prosecuted for firearms crimes arising out of the January 6th demonstration?
No.
Would it surprise you to learn that it is a total of 5?
No.
And that one of those people arrived on January 7th in Washington, D.C.? So it was really 4 on January 6th?
Okay.
And do you know how many people how many demonstrators discharged a firearm in Washington, D.C. on January 6th?
I do not know.
Would it surprise you to learn it was 0?
No.
And then I believe you said that you thought you had suffered a concussion. Is that correct? Because you had a headache for 2 weeks?
That's correct.
Okay. Were you diagnosed with a concussion by a medical professional?
I went to the police and fire clinic, and they sent me to Washington Hospital Center, which is a hospital in Washington, D.C. Received MRI, and I wasn't diagnosed with a concussion, but that they asked me if I wanted to do any further tests for that, and I said no, because if I was or wasn't, the course of treatment was the same.
I have no further questions for you, sir. Thank you.
Any questions from the Colorado Republican Party?
No question.
Any questions from Secretary Griswold?
No question, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
Brief redirect, Your Honor. Officer Hodges, you testified that you were initially stationed on Constitution Avenue. Is that right?
That's correct.
On January 6th?
Yes,
And that was between the hours of 7 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. Is that accurate?
that's accurate.
And during that time, did you observe the crowd walking, or your testimony earlier today was that you observed the crowd walking from the ellipse area to the Capitol. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. No further questions, Your Honor.
Officer Hodges, thank you so much for your testimony and your service to this country.
Yes, Your Honor.
Next witness.
Your Honor, our next witness is remote, and so it might just take about 1 minute. I think they're all ready. We just have to let them in, and it will now be under Congressman Eric Swalwell. Your Honor, the petitioners call Congressman Eric Swalwell. Okay, he's coming right now. Sorry for the delay. Here he is, Your Honor. Thank you, Congressman Swalwell. Just one moment while we get the tech set up. There we go. Okay. Good afternoon. Congressman, can you please introduce yourself?
I need to swear him in.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
Now I'm fumbling with the technology.
well, and we have a siren again.
Congressman Swalwell, can you hear us?
Yes, Your Honor.
Great. Will you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear, under the penalty of law, that the testimony you will give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Good afternoon, Congressman Swalwell. Could you please introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Swalwell, and I represent the 14th Congressional District of Ballot.
How long have you been a member of Congress?
Going on 11 years, elected in 2012 and sworn in on January 3, 2013.
We got it. Were you at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, 2021?
Yes, I was.
And what was supposed to happen in Congress that day?
We were sworn in 3 days earlier, and on the 6th was to be the day where the Congress votes to certify the electoral college votes that were sent from December after being ratified by the states.
I'm going to ask you some more questions about January 6th, 2021, but first I'd like to ask you some questions about prior presidential elections. When, if ever, had you participated in Congress's counting of electoral votes for president before January 6th, 2021?
I have also participated in the January 6th, 2013 certification for the re-election of President Barack Obama, and I also participated on January 6th, 2017 for the election of President Donald Trump.
And does Congress always count the votes on January 6th?
Yes, every 4 years on January 6th. Again, new Congress sworn in on the 3rd, and then on the 6th is when the certification occurs.
In your experience, what is the process for counting and certification of electoral votes on January 6th?
Largely ceremonial, in that the Congress convenes in what's called a joint session, meaning the House and the Senate are in the Congress. The Vice President of the United States, the President of the Senate, presides over the count, and each state alphabetically has their votes called. If there's an objection, you need somebody to meet your objection from the other chamber. So, for example, if a House member objects, a senator would also have to object, and then both bodies would go back to their chambers and debate the objection, and then come back for resuming the count.
And how are those objections resolved?
They're resolved through debate and then a vote.
And I think you testified about this, but what role does the vice president play in those proceedings generally?
As a president of the Senate, the vice president presides over the count. There are tellers who are seated just below the vice president from both chambers, both parties. They tally the counts that are sent from the states, and the vice president literally, kind of like an award show, opens up the count and reads how the state went for each individual.
In 2016, were there objections to the counting and certification of electoral votes from any state?
Do you mean in 2017?
Yes, I'm sorry, arising out of the 2016 election, so on January 6, 2017.
I do recall there was at least one, perhaps more Democratic House objections, but I also recall that there was no senator to sign off, so to speak, or co-sign on the objection, and so we never adjourned for debate.
And so what happened with those objections?
I remember Vice President Biden was in the chamber, and Vice President Biden asked if there was a senator who also objected. No senator objected, and the Vice President would open up the envelope or look at the votes set for the state, and they would just alphabetically proceed to the next state.
And did you object to the counting or certification of any electoral votes?
Not in 2013 and not in 2017. No.
Do you recall any of the objectors in 2017, on January 6, 2017, suggesting that then Vice President Biden, as President of the Senate, could have rejected any of the electoral votes submitted by the states?
No, I do not recall that ever coming up in any caucus meetings or any public representations.
And what do you recall, if anything, about anyone suggesting that then Vice President Biden, as President of the Senate, could declare Hillary Clinton the winner of the 2016 election?
In my recollection, that was never discussed by any of my House colleagues.
Before late 2020 or early 2021, had you ever heard anyone suggest that the Vice President, as President of the Senate, had discretion to reject electoral votes from states?
I would not hear that line of argument until after the 2020 election from the former President Donald Trump and his team.
And did then Vice President Biden try to do any of those things during the counting and certifying of the 2016 presidential election?
He did not. If there was not a senator to match a House member's objection, he moved on with the count.
Do you recall any candidate or colleague suggesting that Congress should ignore the Constitution and certify the election for the winner of the 2016 popular vote?
I don't recall that ever happening.
And did any person supporting any candidate for president, to your knowledge, attack the Capitol on January 6th, 2017?
That definitely did not happen on January 6th, 2017.
And are you aware of anyone ever attacking the Capitol during Congress's counting and certification of presidential electoral votes in the history of our country prior to January 6, 2021?
Certainly not in my lifetime and not any knowledge I have of the Congress's history.
I now want to turn to the 2020 election. Did you have any concerns in the weeks and months leading up to the 2020 presidential election about whether Mr. Trump would accept the results of the election if he lost?
I did, and that was the evening of the election when a statement was made by the president early in the morning, essentially, or not essentially, he was saying that the election was rigged, and then, and to be honest, prior to the election, the president would not honor reporters' requests to accept the outcome of the election if he lost. And then, of course, on the night of the election, he had said in his first public statement that he believed it was rigged. And then in the weeks after, the media declared Joe Biden as the president-elect, and the state certified the election outcomes, and the lawsuits that the president has even brought had all been dismissed in the courts. The president ramped up his rhetoric in public appearances and on Twitter. And the one that I recall was an invitation in mid-December via Twitter for people to come to the Capitol on January 6th, and stating in the tweet, "We'll be quiet."
You testified just there that there were legal challenges that you were aware of brought by Mr. Trump to the 2020 election. By December 14th, 2020, are you aware of what the status of those legal challenges was?
By December 14th, that, if I recall, is the date where the states were certifying their counts
Following the state's certification of electoral votes on December 14th, 2020, what was your understanding as to whether Mr. Trump had any further legal avenues to challenge the 2020 election?
My understanding was the next step in the process was the January 6th certification and then the January 20 inauguration for President-elect Biden. That was it. They had been exhausted.
Let's turn now to January 6th, 2021. What was your role in the counting and certification process on January 6th, 2021?
I was folded in for by Speaker Pelosi that she would like me to preside as the speaker designate at noon on January 6th to gavel us in, so to speak. And so the day starts, every congressional day starts with the speaker gaveling the Congress in. And so I gavel us in, led us in pledge of allegiance. There was a new chaplain to the Congress and asked the chaplain, as we do every opening session, asked the chaplain to lead us in prayer. And then I read an appointment of the tellers that each side, that each party, each chamber had designated to participate in the count on January 6th. And then I adjourned, and all of that lasted no more than 10 minutes.
I'm going to back you up just briefly. What did you do that morning before the certification process began?
I ran from the residence I have in Washington, D.C. to the Capitol and then back. It's a run I do often. And I recall on the run back from the Capitol, actually running up North Capitol, seeing dozens of individuals carrying signs that read "Stop the Steal" and wearing body armor and military fatigues. And I remember pulling down the cap that I was wearing. It was pretty cold. So I pulling it over my face because I didn't want to be seen by this crowd or recognized by this crowd. But it certainly just gave me an unsettling feeling about the direction the day was headed.
Did you watch any of Mr. Trump's speech on the ellipse that day?
I did. Once I returned to the Capitol, and after I opened the session, I was on the floor with my Democratic colleagues, and many of us had our phones out, and we were watching the speech on the floor. We would step off the floor into this area called a cloakroom, which is just footsteps from the floor, and there were televisions on in the cloakroom playing the speech from the president and his supporters at the ellipse.
And what was your reaction to that speech or the parts that you saw of it?
Well, in the weeks before January 6th, the president had fired up his supporters with claims that the election was rigged, said the 6th was going to be wild, and it came together on the 6th. Just from what I saw, individuals on the streets of Washington, and then what I saw in the speech, it appeared an angry mob had assembled around the Capitol and near the White House. And when the president said that his supporters must fight like hell and they won't have a country anymore, that worried me because we were undergoing the process certifying the election he lost. And when he aimed them at the Capitol by saying that he was in solidarity going to the Capitol with them, that we're going to go to the Capitol, a lot of us in the cloakroom looked at each other in a, oh God, what does this mean for us? Kind of feel.
So how did the counting and certification of electoral votes on January 6, 2021 go?
So after I recessed, we took a break for about 50 minutes, and then Speaker Pelosi and Vice President Pence, as the President of the Senate, would next reconvene the House and the Senate in the House chamber. And as I said, it begins alphabetically. So on the Democratic side, because of COVID, only members of leadership and members from the states that were going to have to defend the vote were on the House floor. Any other Democrat would have to watch in the so we adjourned the joint session, meaning the senators left to go to their own chamber for debate. We stayed in our chamber, and Speaker Pelosi took the gavel to kick off the debate on the matter of Arizona.
At some point thereafter, you learned that rioters had breached the Capitol, correct?
Myself and everyone around us on the floor had our phones out and were watching intently on what was happening around the Capitol. We were also receiving a number of Capitol Police alerts. There's an internal email system for members and staff, and the alerts were telling us about the mob that was assembling around the Capitol office buildings that were closed, suspected pipe bombs around the Capitol that had been discovered. And so we were focused on the debate, but also on the security posture, whether it was watching Twitter or receiving the Capitol police alerts was also right in front of us in our handheld devices.
And about what time was this happening?
This was between 1 and 2 o'clock as we watched either people who were in the mob and staged at the Capitol during the stage, or people who were at the ellipse and moved toward the Capitol after the speech.
What was the first thing that occurred that was unusual to you inside the Capitol?
Well, first, I would say watching the mob on our devices, below passed with force, various security perimeters, was unusual. We've never seen anything like that before. But also on the floor, Speaker Pelosi was presiding in the House chamber, and abruptly she was asked to step off the podium, and her security detail took her off the floor. And I also noticed Mr. Hoyer, who was the majority leader, Steny Hoyer of Maryland, and James Clyburn of South Carolina, who was the majority whip, also their details hurriedly went to them and took them off the floor.
And about what time was that?
This was in the 1 o'clock, say mid 1 o'clock hour. And at that point, James McGovern, who was a Rules Committee chairman from Massachusetts, he stepped up to the podium, and so it was a seamless transition. The debate did not stop. He stepped up to the podium and presided over the debate on the matter of Arizona.
After Speaker Pelosi and the other members of leadership that you mentioned were moved out of the chamber, you said debate continued for about how long did debate continue?
For probably another no more than 30 more minutes, and it may have been even fewer.
What happened next in terms of safety recommendations?
Mr. McGovern suspended debate, and a Capitol Police officer went to the podium. I remember it being the lower podium, so the podium where the speaker presides. There's two podiums in what's called the rostrum. The upper podium is where the speaker presides. That's where I got to sit. That's where Speaker Pelosi has presided. That's where McGovern presided. The lower podium, if you think about State of the Union, is where the president speaks. So a security officer went to that lower podium and told the members that there were people unauthorized inside the building, and that Capitol Police was dispersing tear gas, and that we were to reach under our seats and pull out a gas mask and be ready to put it on in case they had to disperse tear gas inside the chamber, and also be ready to move through an evacuation room.
Had you ever had to put a gas mask on in the Capitol House chamber before?
I didn't, until that moment, I did not know that there were gas masks under our seats, and we had also never before, rehearsed any type of scenario. So first, there was just, I think people were surprised that they were even there. Sit on top of them every day, we just didn't know.
Who were you sitting with at that time?
I had moved from sitting with Barbara Lee and Sherry Bustos early in the debate over to Congressman Ruben Gallego of Arizona. His wife had reached out to me. She was worried that Ruben would probably not follow orders of the Capitol Police and that he would want to fight the mob or the protesters. And so she asked me if I could just look out for Ruben. And so I went over and sat with Ruben Gallego.
And what can you tell us about Congressman Gallego's training?
So I knew, and most of our colleagues knew, that Ruben had served a combat mission as a Marine in the Iraq War. And so as we were pulling out the gas masks, he saw immediately that I had no idea how to use or even open the gas mask. And so he started having women first throw him or toss him their gas masks. And he was ripping them open, sometimes using his teeth to rip them open, and was just handing out the gas masks and telling people to not breathe too quickly because that can lead you to pass out. He and I agreed that we would take off our coats so that our congressional pins were not obvious if they hadn't moved to any of the rioters, and also so that we had more freedom of movement. He also handed me a pen that was sitting on the table where he was prepared to debate for Arizona, and he said to me as he handed the pen, he said, if any of them get near you, just put this in their neck.
So what was going through your mind at that moment?
A lot of uncertainty, disbelief that this was happening, that we were taking our coats off, that we were looking for weapons or how to use gas masks. At that point, as we're waiting for the security officer to give us further instructions, the chaplain who I had asked to lead us in prayer earlier in the day went back up to the podium and uninvited, unannounced, just started reading from that lower podium a prayer, and she asked all of us if we would pray with her.
What, if anything, did you notice being done to secure the chamber at that time?
So after I and my colleagues prayed, I noticed that Capitol police officers were, along with some of my Republican members, Republican colleagues were pushing furniture against the back door. So if you think of it, again, the State of the Union is probably the best way to orient yourself. The door that the president walks through to the State of the Union, that's the back of the chamber. Those
How would you characterize the group of people gathered outside the speaker's lobby and the House chamber at that time?
At that point, I could mostly just hear the sounds, the banging over the screen. I would not see that until.
And how would you characterize those sounds? What did it sound like?
It was prompting, and I say that because the chamber is mostly windowless, and so just having been alerted on our phones that suspected bombs were found around the building, and watching the violence against the police officers, and seeing that the mob had reached multiple perimeters and had come closer to the chamber, it was really just the uncertainty of what they wanted or what they would do.
How concerned were you for your personal safety at that moment?
It was escalating as we went from gas masks to a pen in my hand to a prayer from the chaplain. And it was when the chaplain read that prayer that I finally texted my wife, something I did not want to text her. I had essentially been telling her, we're going to be fine, it's okay. I didn't want to worry throughout the morning.
During the attack on the Capitol, were you following Mr. Trump's tweets?
I was. As I said, almost all of my colleagues, we had our phones out and we were reading our phones and following the tweets and the ellipse speeches and listening to the video.
And why were you following his tweets?
We connected the president's tweets to our own safety in the chamber, and also the integrity of the proceedings that were taking place.
I'm going to ask for Exhibit 148 to be displayed, please. And Your Honor, this exhibit has been stipulated by all sides. This is one of Mr. Trump's tweets.
Okay, are you offering it into?
I am offering it into evidence, Exhibit 148, Your Honor. And this is a long exhibit, so we're only going to look at 2 tweets of the whole compilation. So this tweet is on page 83, and it has a timestamp of 2:24 p.m. on January 6th, 2021.
Okay, Exhibit 148 is admitted.
Congressman Swalwell, can you see the exhibit on your screen?
Yes, I see the tweet from the verified account of the former president.
And do you remember reading this tweet while you were in the chamber?
Yes, we received the timestamp request, what I recall. The time that I recall being still on the floor, which is 2:24 p.m. on the 6th.
And how did you interpret this tweet? What did you interpret it to mean?
I interpreted that the president believed that the vice president was refusing to do something that could overturn the outcome the president wanted. But again, for my personal safety and the proceedings we were engaged in, the colleagues that I was with, we interpreted this target had been painted on the Capitol, because that's where the vice president was when the tweet was sent.
And can you read the tweet, Congressman?
Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth! Exclamation.
Did you notice any change in what was happening outside the chamber after this tweet was sent?
Well, we didn't feel more safe. Like it wasn't as if, the mob subsided. We were continuing to be updated by facts. They were trying to secure an evacuation said, we did not feel more safe. It wasn't as if the mob subsided. And so we waited, and this was near the point where we would ultimately leave the floor, but you could still hear the sounds, the pounding outside of the chamber and the screaming of.
When, at some point, you were led out of the chamber, is that correct?
Yes,
And
the security officer went to that lower podium and told us there was an evacuation route and that we were to go in the direction of the Lafayette portrait. Again, two sides. One is Washington, that's where they were stacking chairs. The other was the Lafayette portrait exit. And so we were told to go in that direction.
I think it's them. It is. But the whole WebEx went down. Sorry, Your Honor, small tech issue. Did the entire WebEx go down? Okay.
WebEx seems to still be on.
Okay.
Congressman Swalwell, we're just having a technical problem.
No problem.
Okay. Should I wait?
Let's wait a minute.
Yeah.
If it doesn't get fixed in a minute, you can still hear it. So.
Okay. First one was 83, and the next one's on 84. It's 6:01 p.m.
Mr. Cheney, let's just, I just want to make sure that the court reporter could continue. She couldn't see him for lip reading, but she says she can, so why don't we continue while they work on the technical issue?
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. Congressman Swalwell, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I just can't hear him.
Oh, can you say something, Mr. Swalwell?
Yes, I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
It doesn't allow me on my end.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Hopefully we'll be back to visual in just a moment. Did you play a role in the evacuation of the chamber?
No, the brave police officers were the ones who asked us to leave. Being a rule follower, the son of a cop, I immediately started to follow the police officers as we were asked to leave. But I did see my colleague Ruben Gallego, who is not a rule follower, did not follow the orders of the police. And I saw that he was standing on the House chair
And what path did you take during the evacuation?
So we went out of the doors near the Lafayette portrait, which is the Republican side of the chamber. And there's a long hallway that those doors lead into. It's called the Speaker's Lobby. In a non-COVID time, that's where the press corps assembled and interviewed members. There were no press at the time because of COVID restrictions. And so I went out that door and then down a stairway that was just off that exit.
When you were starting to leave, did you notice that was there anybody still in the chamber?
There were still police officers in the chamber. And as I said, if I recall, there were one or two Republican colleagues who were standing at the double doors at the back of the chamber, helping push the furniture against the doors. But Gallego was one of the last ones on the floor, and so I finally pulled him out. And as we were leaving, I looked down the long hallway of the speaker's lobby at where they had stacked the chairs and saw the mob pressed up against the glass doors at the end of the lobby.
When you were leaving the chamber, were there any people left in the gallery?
Unfortunately, the gallery colleagues of mine were not able to leave at the same time that we were. I did look up at the gallery a number of times, especially when we were with Congressman Eric was yelling at them. Many of them were lying under the chairs of the gallery. Some of them had their gas masks on. Some of them looked like they were in kind of like a prayer group, praying together. But the Capitol Police, later learned the impeachment, have not yet secured the exit for the third floor doors.
Okay. And what was your reaction to seeing those members and staff in the gallery?
Horrified. We felt helpless that the police were not able to get them out, and frankly felt guilt that I was able to leave and they were still up there.
You testified a moment ago that the path you took led you through the speaker's lobby. How long did you stay in the speaker's lobby?
We were encouraged to move as quickly as we could, but I learned you could only move as fast as the people in front of you, and with hundreds of members leaving the floor, there were fits and starts, and so we would move and we would stop and cluster, and the evacuation route would last, I recall, well over 10 to 15 minutes to get us in.
Did you hear anything as you exited the chamber?
As I was leaving the chamber and going through the speaker's lobby, I did hear what sounded like a gunshot. I did not see it, and I was in the mix of members who were trying to move as fast as we could to follow.
And when did you ultimately make it to a safe location?
It took, as I said, at least 10 to 15 minutes, and so I would say sometime just before 3 o'clock or near 3 o'clock.
Who else from Congress did you meet up with there?
House leadership had been taken off the floor when Speaker Pelosi was taken off the floor. So anyone who remained on the floor was members of Democratic leadership, members from states that were defending their vote, and then most of my Republican colleagues. It didn't appear that they had the same COVID restrictions that we had And so that as the group had moved together off the floor, eventually in the evacuation room, our colleagues from the gallery would join us, members of the press corps would join us, and then members of leadership staff who worked in offices in the Capitol would join us.
Once you were in that location, were you receiving updates as to what was going on in the Capitol and outside?
The Sergeant of Arms, who is the individual charged with house security, moved with us and was in the room when we arrived. And so he routinely gave us updates, and frankly, like being on a delayed flight with the captain, told me the same thing every 15 minutes, which was that the Capitol was under attack. They were trying to get more resources to clear the Capitol, but we would have to stay there until the Capitol was cleared. And that was every 15 to 20 minutes.
Was there communication in that location between you and your colleagues about what was happening outside?
Certainly, yes. It was Republicans and Democrats in the same room. And at one point, I do recall that the Sergeant of Arms had kind of loosely implied that they may be bringing buses to the site, and that we would leave in buses. And I was seated next to, for most of the time, next to Congressman Eric Swalwell. And I do remember Mr. Schiff vocalizing that we should not leave, we should stay, and that essentially the worst thing we could do, if there's an attempted coup taking place, is to leave the site of the coup, that we needed to go back to the Capitol and finish the count.
I'm going to now show.
I also recall, sorry, Ruben Gallego also, because I remember asking Gallego if we should consider the buses, and Gallego was asked, I remember the phrase that we would be sitting ducks if we got on a bus and left, that would be the worst thing for us, for our presidency.
At some point that afternoon, are you aware that Mr. Trump made a statement?
Yes, and I remember multiple statements and a video, but yes.
And I'm going to have Mr. Heim bring up exhibit number P68. Your Honor, this is also a stipulated exhibit.
68 submitted.
And do you remember seeing this video, Congressman Swalwell?
Yes, I do.
Can you play the video, Mr. Heim? It indicates there's an issue with the WebEx audio.
Mr. Reedy, how much longer do you have with him? I know you're maybe we should break for lunch and people can figure out the technology.
I've probably got about another 10 or 15 minutes.
I mean, I was hoping to get through direct before lunch, but I'm worried that the technology issue might take some figuring out.
Okay, that's fine, Your Honor.
And it may be that it's not possible
I can also have the video played locally for Congressman Swalwell, because everybody here can see the video, I think. So maybe that's an option too.
Okay, why don't we figure that out, because I'd like to see the video.
Okay, yeah. And it's only 1 minute, it's a short
Okay,
video.
let's take a break. We will reconvene at 1:15, and hopefully somebody on your team can talk to Colin and the IT people here and figure it out.
We'll work very hard to do that. Thank you, Your Honor.